Welcome to the History Maps podcast. The Caucasus Mountains form well, one of the most unforgiving geographical barriers on the planet.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly harsh terrain.
Right. And for millennia, this massive spine of rock has basically served as the crushing point between continents, between religions and empires.
Yeah, it's a literal crossroads, but a very violent one.
Exactly. When you have two massive tectonic plates of human civilization grinding against each other, whether that is the Roman and Persian empires or, the later Islamic caliphates and the Christian kingdoms of the north, the space between them just becomes a meat grinder.
Oh, that's a really apt way to put it.
Yeah, and today we are looking at a highly specific piece of that meat grinder, a medieval realm known as the Kingdom of Hereti.
Right, which is a fascinating case study in survival.
It really is. So
Yeah.
for you listening, the mission today is to unpack how a very localized kingdom emerged in this rugged frontier right between the Iberian and Albanian spheres in the early medieval period.
And we really have to look at the mechanics of that survival, right?
Yeah, exactly. The mechanics of survival, the shifting cultural identity, and the physical ruins they actually left behind.
Well, to really understand Hereti, we have to lay out the physical map first, because in the Caucasus, geography is destiny.
So we're talking about boundaries defined strictly by water and rock.
Exactly. Hereti was flanked by the Nekresi River, which is also known as the Kura River, and that acted as this massive natural southern boundary.
Right.
And then to the north, it was totally walled in by the Alzani River and the foothills of the Greater Caucasus Range.
So it's basically boxed in. What about the east?
To the east, the border was marked by the Turyanshai River. So in modern terms, we are talking about a territory that roughly corresponds to the southeastern corner of the country of Georgia.
Specifically the Kakheti region, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Kakheti region, and then bleeding into the northwestern districts of modern Azerbaijan.
Okay. So it's a real border zone.
That is the core thesis we have to keep in mind today. Hereti was the ultimate borderland. I mean, it was like a membrane.
A membrane, meaning things pass through it constantly.
Right. It was a place where different languages, different religions, and political loyalties basically bled into one another.
Which makes sense for that geography.
And over several centuries, the people living there forged this entirely unique hybrid identity through just, sheer pragmatic survival.
Before eventually being swallowed up by the larger empires around them, of course.
Of course. That's the fate of most border states, unfortunately.
Right. But before we can look at how Hereti operated as an independent kingdom, we need to look at the raw material, the land itself, and the people who actually lived in those river valleys.
Yeah, you have to start at the foundation.
And when you start digging into the origins of a medieval kingdom, you almost immediately hit a wall of mythology.
Oh, always. The textual sources are heavily, heavily mythologized.
Right, and the Georgian chronicles provide a very specific, very tidy origin story for this exact place.
They do. The medieval Georgian chronicles, particularly the writings compiled by the historian Leontim Ravelli, present this foundation narrative that traces the region back to a legendary patriarch named Heroes.
Heroes. So the region of Hereti is founded by a guy named Heroes. Very convenient.
Exactly. And in these complex genealogical trees that medieval historians love to use to map the world, Heroes is described as the son of Thargamos.
And Thargamos is connected to biblical figures, right?
He is. Thargamos is presented as a descendant of Japheth, who was one of the sons of Noah.
So we are drawing a direct line straight back to the Ark.
Right, and the narrative basically asserts that Thargamos divided his vast Caucasian territories among his sons. Heroes was granted this specific land between the rivers we just described.
And he allegedly founded the city of Hereti, which later became known as Karanta, right on the banks of the Alazani River.
That's the story, yes.
Okay, but when a medieval chronicler draws a direct line from a piece of heavily contested real estate to the sons of Noah, my instinct is to look at the political motive.
As you should.
I mean, I read this Heroes myth, and I just see a retroactive property deed. Is this just later Georgian historians creating a convenient story to lay, an ancient divine claim to a borderland that was highly unstable?
Well, origin myths in medieval texts operate exactly like political charters.
Right, they justify the current political reality.
Exactly. When these specific chronicles were being codified, the region of Hereti was actively being integrated into the broader Georgian political and cultural sphere.
So they needed a story to make that integration feel natural.
Yeah, because the reality of the frontier was messy, it was polyglot, it was religiously divided. By creating this genealogy that links the founder of Hereti to the exact same biblical lineage as the founders of the other core Georgian regions.
They're essentially smoothing over that messy reality.
Exactly. They were providing a providential historical justification for political unity. It's basically a way of saying, hey, we are not conquering a foreign land. We are simply reuniting a family that was divided in antiquity.
That makes perfect sense as a political tool, because the historical reality on the ground had basically nothing to do with a tidy biblical family tree.
Not at all. The historical reality was a deeply complex demographic soup.
Right, because in antiquity, the territory that would become Hereti was actually a western province of ancient Caucasian Albania.
Yeah, and Caucasian Albania was a massive, highly significant polity that dominated the eastern Transcaucasus starting around, well, roughly the 2nd century BCE.
And the people living in these river valleys under that polity were incredibly diverse, right?
Oh, incredibly. You had the indigenous tribes known as the Heruri, or the Hers.
Which is likely where the actual name Hereti comes from.
Exactly. But you also had Dagestani groups moving down from the northern mountain passes. There were ethnic Armenians, Persians who were representing the Sassanid imperial administration, and Georgians migrating from the west.
So all of these different groups are sharing the exact same river systems, they're trading in the same markets, intermarrying.
Yeah, it was a totally mixed society.
So how does a centralized state like Caucasian Albania actually administer a population that diverse in that kind of rugged terrain?
Well, it requires a really delicate balance of regional autonomy and central military authority.
A balance that eventually fails, I'm assuming.
It failed catastrophically. Between the 5th and 7th centuries, Caucasian Albania found itself caught between the expansionist ambitions of the Sassanid Persian Empire to the south and the newly emerging Arab caliphates.
Two massive juggernauts.
Right. And as central Albanian authority fractured under that external pressure, the westernmost fringes of their territory, this exact Hereti region, were basically left politically adrift.
And like we said earlier, nature abhors a vacuum.
And geopolitics abhors an unprotected frontier.
So the neighboring power, the Kingdom of Iberia, which is the principal Georgian state to the west, they see this opportunity and step in.
They do, but we shouldn't picture this as a sudden, massive military conquest. It was a much more gradual process of political gravitation.
Like getting pulled into a new orbit.
Exactly. Hereti slowly became a Sarastavo, which functions as a duchy or a military province within the Iberian administrative system.
But shifting the administrative center of gravity from the Alganian sphere in the east over to the Iberian sphere in the west has to fundamentally destabilize the local power structures, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have these local lords who suddenly have to navigate an entirely new set of overlords. It creates a highly volatile environment where, frankly, survival depends entirely on ruthlessness and opportunism.
Which perfectly sets the stage for someone to exploit all that chaos. The decline of the broader regional powers creates the vacuum, and a man named Saul Sumbatishvili steps into it.
Yes, Saul's a fascinating character.
He seemed to operate on pure, concentrated pragmatism.
He really is the defining figure of the early 9th century in this region. He appears in various historical sources under different names, actually.
Like what?
Well, Armenian records usually call him Sal Aranshahik, while Arabic sources refer to him as Sal ibn Sumbat.
Okay, so he's navigating multiple cultural spheres already.
Right. He was a noble claiming descent from the Aranshahik family, which was this ancient Armenian noble house that had really deep historical ties to the leadership of Caucasian Albania.
So he has the bloodline. But, I mean, having a noble pedigree in a collapsed state doesn't really guarantee you anything.
Not unless you're willing to fight for it.
Right, and Saul does not wait for a formal appointment. He just takes power in the most brutal way imaginable.
He does. In the year 822, the remaining political order of the region disintegrated completely.
What was the trigger?
The last prominent ruler of the Miranid dynasty, a man named Varaz Tiridates II, who had basically governed what was left of Caucasian Albania under nominal Abbasid suzerainties, was assassinated by a rival faction.
So the head of state is gone.
Exactly. And Sasmatian recognized that the resulting power vacuum was absolute. He immediately moved into the capital city of Shaki.
But just sitting on a throne in a borderland invites challengers, right? There are always cousins and uncles looking for a claim.
Right, and Saul understood that perfectly. To secure his position, he systematically executed the surviving members of the Miranid royal family.
He just slaughters them.
He permanently eliminated the competing bloodline to ensure absolutely no one could raise a legitimate banner against him.
So Saul wipes the slate clean by eliminating the old guard. He secures the capital. But he is still just a small player on a board dominated by the Abbasid Caliphate, which is, one of the powerful empires in human history at that time.
Yeah, he's a tiny fish in a very dangerous pond.
He is a local warlord sitting right on their northern frontier. To avoid being totally crushed, he has to prove his utility to them.
And utility is truly the only currency the Caliphate respected from a frontier lord.
So what was his opening?
Well, during the 830s, the Abbasid Caliphate was consumed by this massive internal crisis known as the Kuramite Rebellion.
Led by Babak Karamdin, right?
Yes. And this was not a minor uprising, it was a major existential threat to the empire. Babak had created this syncretic movement heavily influenced by Zoroastrianism, and he vehemently rejected Arab dominance.
And he was giving the caliphate a really hard time militarily.
Oh, Babak was a brilliant tactician. He had spent years just humiliating caliphate armies in the mountainous terrain.
So Saul has a front row seat to this massive imperial war. He watches the caliphate struggle to put down Babak.
He watches and he calculates. And then in the year 837, Babak Khurramdin, having finally been routed from his main stronghold by Arab armies, fled north into the Caucasus, seeking refuge.
And he ends up in Saul's territory.
He sought sanctuary right in the territory controlled by Saul Sumbatishvili.
And that is a massive turning point, because Saul is faced with a really critical choice here. He can either harbor a known rebel and invite the full wrath of the caliphate down on his newly acquired lands.
Or he can use the rebel as a bargaining chip.
And Saul chooses the bargaining chip. He captures Babak and hands him directly over to the Arab general Ashin.
It was a deeply pragmatic, cold-blooded move.
Let's look at the mechanics of this decision, though.
Yeah.
Because Saul uses an enemy of the empire to basically buy his own legitimacy. By turning Babak over, Saul is voluntarily accepting vassalage to the Abbasids.
He is submitting, formally.
Right, but he is trading nominal submission to a distant caliph for absolute, unchecked authority in his own physical territory. It's like a high-stakes geopolitical chess match.
It absolutely is. And the transaction was incredibly lucrative for Saul. For handing over Babak, the caliphate rewarded him with an astronomical sum of 1 million silver dirhams.
1 million. That is an insane amount of money for a frontier warlord.
That infusion of wealth alone could secure an army, build fortifications, buy loyalties, but more importantly, the Abbasids granted him the formal title Shah of Arn.
So they give him a Persianate title.
Exactly. By bestowing that specific title, the caliphate was legally recognizing Saul as the legitimate ruler of the territory. We really have to view Saul's betrayal of Babak not merely through a lens of, moral treachery, but as the calculated calculus of borderland statecraft.
Right, but playing the game at that level is inherently dangerous.
Oh, very dangerous.
You make a deal with the caliphate, you take their money, you accept their titles. Eventually, they're going to look at you and realize they just funded the creation of a very powerful, very wealthy warlord right on their border.
Which is the central paradox of serving an empire, right? If you're too incompetent, they replace you. But if you're too successful, they eliminate you.
So Saul became too successful.
He did. His immense wealth and consolidated power inevitably bred suspicion in Baghdad. The Arab authorities eventually determined he was just too independent to be trusted.
So they come for him.
They do. He was arrested by Abbasid forces and deported to Baghdad.
But even with his personal downfall, Saul's brutal pragmatism had achieved something lasting, right?
Yes. He had basically carved the physical borders of a distinct principality out of the total collapse of Caucasian Albania. He created the geographic container of Hereti.
Saul creates the container. But, an undefined principality is just a target for larger neighbors. The generations that follow Saul realize that political autonomy requires formal validation.
Right. You need a recognized status to survive the long game.
To protect the container, they decide to claim the ultimate title. They decide to call themselves kings.
And we see this formal elevation of status under Saul's grandson, a ruler named Grigol Hammam.
So we're moving into the late 9th century now.
Yes. By the late 9th century, the geopolitical weather had changed yet again. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had been so utterly dominant during Saul's era, was now experiencing severe internal fracturing.
They were losing their grip on the provinces.
Exactly. Their ability to project power into peripheral areas like the Caucasus was rapidly deteriorating. Grigol Hammam observed this withdrawal of Arab authority and just moved aggressively to fill the void.
So.
He launched military campaigns to expand Hereti's territory significantly. And then, in the year 893, he took a step that permanently altered the regional dynamics. He formally crowned himself king, officially establishing the Kingdom of Hereti.
Okay, but if you are the ruler of a neighboring Georgian principality and some warlord on your eastern border suddenly starts wearing a crown and calling his territory a kingdom, you don't send a congratulatory gift.
No, you definitely do not.
You see a direct threat to your own regional influence. Elevating yourself to a kingdom basically makes you a massive target.
And the immediate reaction from the surrounding powers was violent and coordinated. The neighboring Georgian states viewed Hereti not as a sovereign equal, but as a territory that, in their minds, historically and rightfully belonged within their sphere of influence.
So they team up.
They do. Kyriake the First, who was the ruler of the adjacent Caucasian principality, recognized the danger of a consolidated Hereti. He reached out to King Constantine III of Abkhazia, which was a formidable power located further to the northwest.
And they form a coalition.
A military alliance with a single, uncompromising objective: dismantle the rising kingdom of Hereti before its roots could really take hold.
This friction culminates in the year 915. The combined forces of Abkhazia and Kakheti march into Hereti, and I want to look closely at a specific event during this invasion: the siege of the Vijini fortress in the spring of 915.
It's a really defining moment.
The Heretian ruler at this time is King Adarnase, the second Patricios, who succeeded Grigol Hammam. He is forced to retreat into this fortress, Vijini. Describe the mechanics of a siege like this in the Caucasus.
Well, Vijini was a strategic stronghold designed to leverage the rugged topography. But when you are facing a massive coalition army, geography can suddenly become a trap.
Because you can't get out.
Exactly. The Allied forces executed a highly coordinated pincer movement. The Abkhazian forces descended from the north, applying immense pressure on the northern defenses, while the Caucasian army locked down all the southern approaches.
Oh, it's a total blockade.
Right. The mechanics of a siege here are less about, massive siege engines battering down stone walls, and much more about isolation and starvation.
You just choke them out.
You cut off the supply lines, you control the water sources, and you apply constant psychological pressure, knowing the defenders have literally nowhere to retreat.
So Adarnase II Patricios is completely boxed in. He is watching his supplies dwindle, and he knows no relief army is coming.
And on April 16, 915, which historically coincided with Good Friday, Adarnase II, Patricios accepted the inevitable. He emerged from the Vijini fortress and formally surrendered.
And the terms they gave him were heavy, right?
The terms imposed by the victors were deeply punitive. Adarnase was forced to basically carve up his newly declared kingdom. The prosperous districts of Arishi and Gavazi were ceded to the Kingdom of Abkhazia, and the district of Orkhobi was handed straight over to Kakheti.
This is where I really struggle to understand the resilience of this state.
How so?
They crowned themselves a kingdom in 893, right? And barely 2 decades later, their king is handing over massive chunks of his territory to his neighbors. If Hereti was surrounded by powers capable of forcing that kind of capitulation, how does the kingdom even survive the decade?
Well, the survival of Hereti was predicated on understanding how to fight a war of attrition.
Okay, meaning what tactically?
Meaning they knew how to weaponize the geography of the Alazani Valley and those forested foothills. When faced with overwhelming numbers, the Heretian forces rarely engaged in pitched, open-field battles.
Because they would just be destroyed.
Exactly. Instead, they retreated into the dense forests, utilizing asymmetric warfare. They harassed supply lines and just made the occupation of their territory incredibly costly in blood and treasure.
So they bleed the occupiers dry.
Right. And more importantly, Adarnase II Patricios understood that in the Caucasus, alliances and power dynamics shift constantly. You just have to survive long enough for your enemy to be attacked by someone else.
So he just waits for a distraction.
He waits for a massive geopolitical shift. And it happens. In the 920s, just a few years after the disaster at Vijini, the Abbasid Caliphate, which had temporarily reorganized its forces, launched a devastating invasion into Kakheti.
The very people who just took his land.
Yes. The Kakhetian armies, which had just humiliated Hereti, were suddenly fighting for their own survival against Arab forces.
Talk about a shift in fortune.
And Adarnase II Patricios immediately recognized the opportunity. While Kakheti was occupied with the Abbasids, Adarnase just voided the Treaty of 915.
He just ripped it up.
Basically. He marched his forces out, reclaimed the title of king, and systematically recaptured Orkobi, Arishi, and Gavazi. He utilized the immense distraction of a larger imperial war to completely restore his borders.
That's incredible. Adarnase proves that Hereti can take a punch, use the forest to bleed the occupying forces, and then strike back the moment the enemy looks away.
It's the ultimate opportunistic survival.
But relying purely on military opportunism is exhausting, right? You can only recapture the same fortresses so many times before the population just loses faith. To permanently secure their independence, the rulers of Hereti needed to define their state culturally.
Right, they needed an anchor.
They needed their people to be loyal not just to a warlord, but to an idea.
And that realization led to what is easily the most significant internal transformation in Hereti's history.
A total religious pivot.
Yes. To fortify their realm, particularly against the constant looming threats from the Islamic powers and the Armenian spheres to the south and east, the Heretian leadership engineered a deliberate, highly calculated shift in their religious identity.
They aligned with the West.
They decided to permanently align themselves with the Georgian cultural sphere.
And this cultural pivot really centers around two people, Queen Dinar and her son, King Ishkanik.
Queen Dinar is arguably the most consequential figure in the cultural history of Hereti.
But she wasn't even from there, was she?
No, she was not native to the region. She was a Georgian princess, the daughter of Duke Adarnase, the third of Tau, which was a powerful, noble house deeply entrenched in the Georgian Orthodox tradition.
Okay, so she marries in.
When she married into the Heretian royal family, she brought her Chalcedonian Orthodox faith with her. And her son, King Ishkanik, who ruled from roughly 943 to 965, he shared her vision completely.
So together, operating in the early 10th century, they basically orchestrate this massive top-down cultural revolution.
They officially converted the Kingdom of Hereti from the Oriental Orthodox tradition, specifically the Armenian Miaphysite doctrine that had dominated the area for centuries, over to the Eastern Orthodox tradition, aligning completely with the Georgian Church.
I have to stop you there, because this is where the logistics of history really fascinate me.
The logistics of a conversion?
Yeah. You do not just wake up on a Tuesday in the 10th century and tell a deeply religious agrarian population that they were practicing a completely different theology now. How does a monarch actually execute a kingdom-wide religious conversion without triggering a massive peasant revolt?
It's a great question. A top-down conversion is really an exercise in administrative leverage and elite replacement.
Elite replacement.
Right. Dinar and Ishkanik didn't simply send out a theological decree and hope people listened. They actively replaced the ecclesiastical hierarchy.
So they fired the bishops.
Basically, yes. Armenian Miaphysite bishops were gradually replaced by Georgian Chalcedonian clergy. They also utilized state patronage to build new churches specifically designed for the Eastern Orthodox liturgy.
And they changed the language.
Crucially, yes, they changed the language of the divine. The liturgy shifted from Armenian to Georgian. Official state documents, royal decrees, religious texts, they all began utilizing the Georgian Esemtavrili script.
That's a massive societal shift.
And they tied social advancement, taxation benefits, and political favor directly to the new church. Over a generation, this systematic pressure fundamentally rewired the cultural identity of the populace, pulling a deeply hybrid region firmly into the Georgian cultural orbit.
That is heavy. But while they are internally re-engineering the soul of the kingdom, Ishkanik still has to deal with the physical threats on his borders.
Because geography never allowed the rulers of Hereti to focus solely on internal matters.
Right.
While Ishkanik was pushing this massive westward cultural orientation, he faced severe pressure from the south. He was actually forced to pay heavy tribute to the Salurid dynasty, which was a very powerful Iranian state based in Daylem that was aggressively expanding into the Caucasus.
But Ishkanik seems to share the pragmatic patience of his ancestors. He just pays the tribute and waits.
He waits for his moment. And in the year 950, the Salurid state was suddenly consumed by a violent internal succession crisis.
Another geopolitical distraction.
Exactly. The moment their military focus turned inward, Ishkanik acted. He immediately ceased all tribute payments, mobilized his forces, and declared total, unencumbered political independence.
So by the mid-10th century, Ishkanik has established linguistic unity, religious alignment with the powerful Georgian states, and total political independence from the southern powers. It is a masterclass in statecraft, and it totally sets the stage for Hereti's golden age.
It really was their peak.
But I look at this strategy and I see a fatal flaw. By adopting Georgian orthodoxy and the Georgian language to protect themselves, didn't they basically just erase the very cultural distinctions that justified their existence as a separate kingdom in the first place?
You've hit the nail on the head.
I mean, they made themselves look exactly like the Georgian powers that had always wanted to absorb them.
You have identified the exact tragic paradox that defines the second half of Hereti's history. The very cultural integration that provided them with internal stability and powerful Western allies ultimately eradicated the barriers to their political dissolution.
Which is incredibly ironic.
It is. But before that dissolution occurred, the kingdom reached an extraordinary zenith of power.
And the peak of this power arrives with John Sennacherib.
Right. John Sennacherib, the son of King Ishkanek, ruled from 965 to 995. During his 30-year reign, the Kingdom of Hereti reached its maximum territorial extent and its absolute highest level of international prestige.
Because he was a really effective military commander, right?
He was a remarkably effective commander. He launched these highly successful campaigns to the east, permanently annexing the right bank of Caucasian Albania.
That's a huge land grab.
This expansion was so significant that the Armenian historian Mavziz Kakan Kadvatsi actually referred to John Sennacherib with the monumental title Restorer of the Kingdom of Albania.
Wow. I mean, that is an intense title.
But he didn't just expand east. He pushed north, annexing rugged parts of the Caucasian highlands, and he formally adopted the title King of the Senars, asserting dominance over the fierce mountain tribes of the region.
He is operating on a completely different level than his predecessors. He isn't just defending borders. He is swallowing neighboring territories and claiming titles that evoke ancient legendary empires.
He really was the undisputed hegemon of the Eastern Caucasus at that point, maintaining highly advantageous diplomatic relations with both the Salavids to the south and the powerful Georgian ruler David III Kuropalats in the west.
He built a machine of state that seemed invincible.
Seemed invincible, yes. However, the foundational weakness of any absolute monarchy is biology.
Ah.
An autocracy is only as strong as its succession plan. And in 995, John Sennacherib died, and he died without a male heir.
And a kingdom that relies entirely on the strength and personality of a single military leader faces an immediate existential crisis the second the throne is empty.
And in the Caucasus, an existential crisis is immediately exploited. The lack of a clear, uncontested successor plunged the Heretian nobility into massive factional infighting.
These sharks smell blood.
Exactly. Karik III, famously known as Karike the Great, the deeply ambitious ruler of the neighboring Caucasian state, recognized that the formidable military machine of Hereti was paralyzed by this succession crisis.
So he makes his move.
In the 1020s, Karike launched a decisive, overwhelming military campaign. He totally defeated the disorganized Russian forces.
Did he just make them a vassal?
No, he did not simply extract tribute or territory. He executed a complete political merger. He combined the two realms, creating the unified Kingdom of Hereti, and he shifted the central capital westward to the city of Telafi.
So Hereti loses its sovereignty, but it continues to exist as a distinct half of this new, localized power block. When does the entity of Hereti disappear from the map entirely?
The final permanent erasure of Hereti as a political concept occurs about 80 years later.
Under who?
During the reign of King David IV, universally known as David the Builder.
Okay, a huge figure in Georgian history.
Yes. David the Builder was engaged in this monumental, decades-long project to forcefully unify all the fragmented Georgian lands into a single, highly centralized monarchy.
What was driving that unification?
His overarching goal was to create a state capable of resisting the massive encroaching threat of the Seljuk Turks.
Right.
So in 1104 and 1105, having secured the western and central regions, David focused his military machine on the east, fully intent on absorbing the kingdom of Hereti.
Now, David the Builder is famous for his military campaigns, but he doesn't actually have to fight a grinding war of attrition to take Hereti, does he?
No, he doesn't. The final collapse of Hereti was basically an inside job.
How so?
Well, the unified kingdom of Hereti was ruled at that time by King Exoton III. The local nobility in the Hereti region, led by a highly influential faction known as the Ereshiani clan, made a very cold geopolitical calculation.
They weighed their options.
They recognized that Exarchon III was entirely incapable of defending them against the Seljuks, and they saw the rising power of David the Builder.
So they flipped.
The Ereshiani clan orchestrated a coup. They arrested their own monarch, Azartan III, and delivered him as a prisoner directly to David the Builder.
That is brutal.
With the king betrayed by his own vassals, the kingdom of Hereti disintegrated instantly, and the entire territory was permanently dissolved into the unified kingdom of Georgia.
I want to examine the calculus of the Aretiani clan here. Did the local nobles of Hereti betray their king and surrender their political autonomy? Because, after a century of liturgical and linguistic integration initiated by Queen Dinar, they genuinely felt a deep sense of ethnic unity with the Georgians. Or was handing over their king purely a survival tactic?
And to understand their decision, we really must look at the mechanics of the threat they faced.
The Seljuks.
Right. The overriding terror in the Caucasus in the early 12th century was the Seljuk Turks. A Seljuk nomadic invasion was not a conventional war of borders and sieges. It was a total existential threat to an agrarian society.
Because they're nomads, they fight differently.
Nomadic armies move with immense speed, devastating crops, destroying irrigation networks, and literally depopulating entire valleys to create grazing land for their herds.
So it's total destruction.
Yes. So the Aretiani clan's betrayal was a pure calculation of the lesser of two evils.
Submitting to David the Builder meant accept of centralized taxation, right?
Right. Accepting taxation and a loss of local political autonomy. But it offered the protection of a highly organized professional Christian army.
Whereas resisting David
meant fighting a two-front war against a unifying Georgian state on one side and facing total societal annihilation by Turkic nomads on the other.
So they traded the crown for their lives.
They chose a harsh tax collector over the destruction of their fields.
Which makes sense. So the political borders of Hereti vanish. The kingdom they fought so hard to carve out is absorbed and erased. But the people themselves did not vanish, and the structures they built in those river valleys remained. Which brings us to the archaeological record, to the physical stones and bones left behind in the earth.
And the archaeological record is absolutely crucial here because it provides unfiltered, tangible evidence of the people of Hereti.
Because the texts are all biased.
Exactly. Textual chronicles are written by the victors and heavily politicized, but physical ruins and burial practices revealed the specific, localized traditions that the people of Hereti actually practiced.
Right.
Even as they assimilated into broader Georgian culture, they maintained highly distinct physical markers of their hybrid identity.
So let's focus on the site of Nekresi. The excavations here seem to challenge a lot of assumptions about the scale of early Christianity in this region.
Oh, totally. Nekresi, which is located in the fertile Alazani Valley, is one of the most revealing archaeological sites in the eastern Caucasus. During extensive excavations, teams uncovered the foundation walls of a truly monumental structure known as the Dolochopi Basilica.
How big are we talking?
The dimensions are staggering when you consider the geographic location and the time period. The basilica measures 44 meters in length and 28 meters in width.
That is massive.
And it was constructed sometime between the 4th and 6th centuries. To put that in perspective, they were building a structure the size of a major European cathedral right in the rugged foothills of the Caucasus during late antiquity.
44 by 28 meters requires an incredible amount of labor, engineering knowledge, and sheer wealth to construct.
It really demonstrates that the early Christian community in Hereti was highly organized, heavily funded, and deeply connected to broader architectural trends in the Christian world.
But it didn't last, did it?
Unfortunately, no. This magnificent structure did not survive long. The geologic instability of the Caucasus intervened, and the basilica was largely destroyed by a catastrophic earthquake in the 50s of the 6th century.
An earthquake. But the silver lining for archaeologists is that the collapse preserves what was underneath.
Precisely. The destruction of the building sealed and protected what lay beneath it. Directly under the floor of the central hall, archaeologists uncovered two highly significant burials, cataloged as Grave 58 and Grave 97.
Let's analyze Grave 58. What exactly did they find in that specific burial?
Grave 58 contained the skeletal remains of a male, estimated through osteological analysis to be between 45 and 50 years old at the time of death.
Could they tell anything about his life?
The bones provided a fascinating record. The skeleton showed a clearly healed wound on the right leg, indicating he had survived significant physical trauma.
Okay. And how was he buried?
He was not buried directly in the soil, but within a meticulously constructed box made of fitted slate stone tiles. But the detail that truly fascinated archaeologists is the precise anatomical articulation of the skeleton.
Meaning how the body was positioned inside the stone box. What was the position?
The deceased was laid flat on his back with his left hand folded traditionally across his chest, but his right arm was bent sharply at the elbow and raised upwards, positioned parallel to his spine with the hand right near the shoulder.
Okay.
In the iconographic context of early Christian mortuary practices, this specific deliberate positioning is universally recognized as a blessing pose.
Now, I have to question the intentionality here.
Sure.
We are analyzing a skeleton that has been subjected to 1,500 years of geologic pressure. Earthquakes literally destroyed the building above it. The ground shifts, water moves soil. How can you be certain that the position of the arm is a deliberate blessing pose and not just, the result of post-mortem settling or a collapsed burial shroud?
That is the exact scrutiny applied in mortuary archaeology. The mechanics of decomposition and soil pressure dictate how bones settle. However, Grave 58 was an enclosed slate stone box, which severely limited external soil intrusion and prevented the body from shifting significantly as it decomposed.
That was protected.
Very protected. Furthermore, when forensic archaeologists examined the precise angles of the joints, the articulation of the shoulder and the elbow, they determined that the arm could not have naturally fallen into that upright, parallel position due to gravity or decay.
It's just not physically possible for it to look that way.
Right. The arm was intentionally placed and likely secured with bindings before rigor mortis passed to ensure it remained in that exact posture when the stone lid was sealed.
So it was entirely deliberate.
This level of deliberate arrangement, which is entirely unseen in other Georgian burials from this era, proves undeniable intent.
So the community intentionally froze him in an eternal act of blessing.
Correct. And the placement of the burial is also critical. Being interred directly beneath the central nave of a massive basilica is the highest honor imaginable in that society.
Right.
The prevailing archaeological consensus is that individuals buried with such unique reverence in that specific location were extremely high-ranking clergy. It is highly probable they were the builder bishops, the very men who organized the wealth and labor to commission the temple above them.
And there's another highly specific physical detail in these graves that separates them from standard burials, right?
Yes, there is. In both Grave 58 and Grave 97, the skulls of the deceased were not resting on the flat slate floor of the box.
What were they on?
The individuals who buried them had carefully placed specially selected smooth cobblestones directly beneath the skulls, basically functioning as a physical pillow of stone.
Placing a rock under a bishop's head seems incredibly harsh. What is the functional or symbolic purpose of a cobblestone pillow?
Well, in medieval theology, physical discomfort in death often symbolizes a connection to divine suffering or revelation. Scholars link this specific cobblestone ritual to two potential theological sources.
Your char.
The first is the biblical narrative of Jacob's dream at Bethel in the book of Genesis, where Jacob uses a stone for a pillow and experiences a vision of a ladder reaching to heaven.
Okay, that makes sense.
The second possibility is a physical homage to the relic of the stone from Christ's grave in Jerusalem, which was a hugely important symbol in early Eastern Christianity.
So they're physically tying them to these biblical events.
By placing a humble cobblestone beneath the heads of these elite bishops, the Heretian community was physically anchoring their local leaders to the foundational events of biblical history. This highly localized mortuary ritual basically proves that the Heretian borderland was actively creating its own distinct religious practices, independent of the mainstream traditions of both Iberia and Albania.
It is a stunning visual. A bishop buried beneath a colossal stone cathedral that would soon be shattered by an earthquake, his right arm bound upward in an eternal blessing, his skull resting on a river stone to connect him to Jacob.
It's incredibly evocative.
And this basilica is just one piece of the architectural footprint Hereti left behind.
It is. The physical landscape of the region is defined by these monumental remnants. At the Nekresi monastery complex, you find a sophisticated architectural rotunda, this round temple dating from the 7th to the 9th centuries that showcases really advanced engineering.
And there are others.
There is the Kumuki St. George Church, which served as a massive regional pilgrimage site, and the military architecture is equally impressive, with fortresses like Kvedera and Kornabuji built into nearly inaccessible cliffs to guard those eastern approaches.
They really dug into the landscape.
And the ground is still yielding new connections to the political narrative. In 2017, archaeologists working in the Alaverdi Monastery complex uncovered a highly decorated tomb containing royal regalia.
Who was it?
This tomb has been firmly identified as the final resting place of King Faverik III, the very Caucasian king who launched the invasion in the 1020s and annexed Hereti.
So the man who ended their independence is buried right there among their monuments.
Yes.
The ruins of Hereti are fascinating as ancient history, but what makes this specific deep dive so critical is that these stones are not just historical artifacts.
No, they are very much alive in modern politics.
The legacy of Hereti, the fluid nature of its borders, and its hybrid culture continue to act as fuel for intensely heated political and demographic disputes in the Caucasus today.
The history of Hereti actively dictates modern geopolitical realities. The medieval borders we have discussed literally formed the basis of national identities for the modern states of Georgia and Azerbaijan.
But to understand the current demographic reality of the region, we have to examine the profound trauma inflicted on the area centuries after the kingdom fell, specifically during the 17th century.
Right, the Safavid era.
This brings us to the policies of the Safavid Empire, specifically Shah Abbas I.
Yes. In the early 1600s, the Safavid ruler Shah Abbas I sought to definitively crush Georgian resistance and secure his northern frontier.
What did he do?
He implemented devastating demographic and political policies in the Eastern Caucasus. He established an entirely new administrative entity known as the Elisu Sultanate, planting it squarely in the heart of historical Hereti.
And who was running it?
To rule it, he installed a local Georgian prince who had been compelled to convert to Islam. Simultaneously, the collapse of local defense structures allowed for relentless, devastating raids by Dagestani mountain tribes who just swept down into the fertile Alazani Valley to capture slaves and plunder resources.
The mechanics of that pressure must have been unbearable for the local population. You have a new Islamic administration controlling taxation and justice, combined with the constant physical terror of mountain raids.
It was. And when a population is subjected to overwhelming economic marginalization, physical violence, and the removal of their traditional religious elite, demographic shifts occur rapidly. Faced with absolute ruin, large segments of the local Georgian Orthodox population in the Hereti region converted to Islam to secure tax relief, physical protection, and just basic survival.
And the descendants of those 17th century conversions are still living in the exact same river valleys today.
They are. They are known today as the Ingaloy people. The ethnonym Ingaloy is actually derived from a Turkic root word meaning newly converted. They are a distinct ethno-linguistic group residing primarily in the northwestern districts of modern Azerbaijan.
Do they still speak Georgian?
They speak a specific localized dialect of the Georgian language, but their culture is deeply reflective of the complex, traumatic religious history of the Heretian borderland. They really are the living, breathing legacy of the shifting borders we have been discussing.
When you have a living population caught between two distinct cultural spheres, surrounded by the ruins of a medieval kingdom, the historical narrative becomes highly weaponized.
Highly weaponized, yes.
So let's look at the modern historiographical debate. We're going to impartially outline how different modern nations view the exact same medieval history.
The academic interpretations are diametrically opposed because they are basically tasked with validating modern national boundaries.
Let's examine the Georgian academic perspective first.
Sure. From the mainstream Georgian viewpoint, the Kingdom of Hereti was, from its very foundations, an inherently Kartvelian or Georgian political entity.
Relying on those foundation myths.
Right. Georgian historians emphasize the foundation myth of heroes. They highlight the mass adoption of the Georgian language and Chalcedonian orthodoxy under Queen Dinar, and they point to Hereti's ultimate integration into the unified Georgian monarchy of David the Builder as definitive proof that the region has always been a core component of the Georgian cultural sphere.
So how do they view the Ingaloy people?
Consequently, the Georgian perspective views the modern Ingaloy people simply as ethnic Georgians who were victims of forced 17th century Islamization.
The Georgian narrative sees Hereti as a lost province that always belonged to the family. How does the Azerbaijani academic establishment interpret the exact same centuries of history?
The Azerbaijani academic perspective constructs a fundamentally different narrative architecture. They argue that Hereti was essentially a Western extension of ancient Caucasian Albania.
Going back to the geographic reality before Saul.
Exactly. They highlight the initial demographic presence of Albanian tribes. They emphasize the rule of the Aranshahik dynasty under the warlord Selskumbaden, and they point to the region's geographical overlap with the historical province of Iran.
So under this view, who are the local populations?
In this historiographical model, the local populations, including the ancestors of the Inguloi people, are viewed not as Georgians, but as direct descendants of the indigenous Caucasian Albanians.
Why is a connection to Caucasian Albania so strategically important for modern Azerbaijani historians?
Because establishing a direct line of continuity with Caucasian Albania provides modern Azerbaijan with a mechanism to demonstrate deep indigenous roots in the region that significantly predate the arrival of Turkic nomadic groups in the 11th century.
Right.
It anchors the modern national identity not in medieval migrations, but in late antiquity, giving them an ancient historical claim to the territory.
It's fascinating. You have two nations looking at the exact same ruined Dolokopi Basilica, reading the same medieval chronicles about Sulsumbattian, and drawing totally opposite conclusions about who rightfully owns the dirt.
It happens all over the world, but it's very pronounced here.
When the historical texts are so heavily politicized, do the hard sciences offer any objective clarity? Like, what do modern linguistics and genetic studies reveal about the people actually living there?
Well, the scientific data deeply frustrates both nationalist narratives because genetics do not respect political borders.
Right.
Modern linguistics and extensive genetic studies indicate that the population of historical Hereti possesses a profoundly hybrid profile.
Which perfectly aligns with the borderland theory.
Exactly. The genetic markers reveal deep indigenous Caucasian roots that align statistically with both Kartvelian populations to the west and Albanian-descended populations to the east. The science reflects precisely what the history suggests. Hereti was a true borderland, a biological and cultural membrane where populations from the east and the west intermarried and mixed constantly over millennia.
But the debate over this history is not confined to university lecture halls. It drives physical border disputes right now.
It creates very tangible diplomatic friction. During the Soviet era, internal administrative borders in the Caucasus were often drawn quite arbitrarily, ignoring these deep historical complexities.
And when the Soviet Union collapsed.
Since the collapse, those arbitrary lines have become rigid international borders, leading to ongoing unresolved delimitations between modern Georgia and Azerbaijan.
Is there a specific slash point?
The most volatile example is the dispute over the David Geregi monastery complex. This is a massive, ancient network of rock-hewn Georgian Orthodox monasteries that literally straddles the modern unresolved border.
It sits right on the line.
Right, on it. And the diplomatic negotiations over this site are incredibly tense because the physical border cuts right through an area saturated with the competing historical claims of Hereti and Caucasian Albania.
I try to process this, and I really struggle to understand how the political borders of a kingdom that collapsed nearly a millennium ago, a kingdom founded by a pragmatic warlord and secured by a medieval queen changing the liturgical language, can still dictate international diplomacy today.
If we examine the mechanics of state building in the Caucasus, it becomes entirely logical. In this region, history is not a static subject confined to the past.
It's active.
History is the primary currency of modern legitimacy. It is the raw material used to validate statehood, to justify the control of territory, and to define ethnic belonging.
So it's everything.
When modern diplomats sit down to negotiate the border near David Geregi, they are not merely debating water rights or a ridgeline, they are arguing over the legacy of Queen Dinar, the conquests of John Senecrum, and the ethnic identity of the men buried in Grave 58. The medieval past forms the foundational bedrock of the modern state, and when that bedrock is contested, every political structure built on top of it remains unstable.
I want to focus on that idea of an incomplete foundation. When we argue over these medieval borders, we are assuming we actually have the full picture of what was there. But if this region was as dense, forested, and volatile as we've discussed, what are we missing?
That is the most compelling question facing the future of this field. We argue over texts and visible ruins, but the sheer ruggedness of the Heretian geography, the deep, heavily forested valleys of the Caucasus foothills, means our map of this kingdom is fundamentally incomplete.
So there's more out there.
Definitely. As modern technologies like LIDAR, which uses lasers to map ground contours beneath dense forest canopies, are increasingly deployed in the Caucasus, we are likely going to discover vast networks of unknown Heretian settlements, hidden fortresses, and unrecorded basilicas.
And what happens when we find them?
When those hidden structures are finally mapped, the new data will likely upend both the Georgian and Azerbaijani nationalist narratives entirely. We will likely find a physical landscape that looks far more hybrid, strange, and localized than any modern political theory wants to admit.
It just complicates the narrative.
It reminds us that when we look at a map, we are accustomed to seeing solid, unyielding lines separating one nation from another. But the reality of Hereti proves that borders are membranes.
They breathe.
The people of Hereti survived by being adaptable, trading in multiple languages, adopting new alphabets to secure alliances, and burying their bishops in unique poses under massive stones. They show us that history is rarely forged in the safe, quiet centers of empires. It is forged out at the fraying edges in the messy, hybrid reality of the frontier.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.